Welcome to the Citizens Band Radio Hour. Thoughtful conversations that explore issues of media and journalism, democracy, and citizenship. The Citizens Band Radio Hour is sponsored by the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. You can visit the center online at mediaandcitizenship.org. Here's your host, Coy Barefoot.
Marc Sageman is a former CIA operations officer. He has advised various branches of the U.S. government in the war on terror. He is also a forensic psychiatrist and author. His must-read books include Understanding Terror Networks, Leaderless Jihad, and most recently, Misunderstanding Terrorism.
Marc, welcome to the program, sir. I am very glad you're here with us.
It's my pleasure.
Marc, what is it that we misunderstand most about terrorism? Let's just start with the title of your book, Misunderstanding Terrorism. What don't we get?
Well, people just focus on the perpetrators. And it's a little bit like describing a matching box, looking at just one of the two boxes. And so when you see the box, hitting emptiness and then going down on the canvas, you don't really understand what happens unless you look also at the other boxer who's fighting him. And so this notion of we misunderstanding the conflict that generate the violence of terrorism, we have to look at the two belligerents, the two people fighting. And this really kind of implies a whole new way of looking at it and a whole new way of analyzing and preventing it.
We would assume that the smartest guys in the room, looking at how we combat groups like ISIS, would be taking those things into account, because what you propose is a pretty basic way to approach this kind of problem. But if I understand you right, that's not what we're doing.
That is not what we're doing. Whenever you categorize yourself in one group or the other, and this kind of self-categorizing is as old as human beings. You were from one cave and the other guys from the other cave were the other. You lived in a small village. People from another village were the other. When you kind of categorize yourself in a group, you basically favor your own group and you reduce the other to one-dimensional stereotype. And so when we are the good guys fighting the bad guys, we don't really look at it as a conflict between two people. We just look at it as eliminating or defeating the bad guy without looking at our own intervention that may provoke the other guy or diminish the violence of the other guy.
What needs to happen that's not happening now when it comes to the West's response to Islamic terrorism, to the kind of stuff that we are dealing with as a nation on 9/11, in Boston, in Orlando, the kind of stuff that we're dealing with ISIS? What needs to happen that's not happening?
Well, if the adversary is small enough, you can kill your way out of it. But if it's not, and as you pointed out rightly, is a Western response to what the other guys are doing to us. What you have to understand is what the other guys are doing to us is a response to what we are doing to them in the first place. This whole notion of the revival of Islamic, how should I put it, this notion of make Islam great again, which is what Salafism is about, came as a result of 19th century Western imperialism to the Middle East. And so you had the development of the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1920s that kind of, escalated to various violent splinters of it in the 1970s as a result of, the defeat by Israel in 1967. It brought this message that we are losing all around the world because of Western intervention. And we have to, use a message that resonates nowadays. We have to make Islam great again. And so it's really kind of this fight, this conflict between what they see the West aggressing them and what we see Islam aggressing them. And by just, blaming and pointing your finger at the other guy, you don't really understand the whole conflict. What is happening is that we are totally blinded by our own contribution to this. And what needs to happen is that, both sides need to take a step backwards, and they won't do it unless the other side is doing it. It's mutual reinforcement. It's this mutual reinforcement of conflict that keeps on escalating it.
Marc, you're asking Americans to have a deep appreciation for their own history and even more of a challenge, world history. And we're not really good at that kind of thing.
I know we're not, but that's what you get. I mean, in a sense.
Yeah, but I think
this is the opposite of what you remember. About 15 years ago, Donald Rumsfeld was saying, "We're bombing them there. We're fighting them there, so we don't have to fight them here." What I'm saying is that if you fight them there, you make sure you're going to fight them here. Because there are people here who identify with the victims of who we kill over there, and they say, they killed my people. I volunteered to become a soldier, a mujahid, to defend my community, and I will do it here. If they kill babies there, I'll kill babies here. And this is what people don't understand, because American public sees this as coming out of nowhere. It comes out of the vacuum. And so they say, well, if they do that, it comes out of nowhere. There's no understanding of it. That means it's just pure evil, and the only way to deal with evil is to kill them until there's no more evil. They don't really see their own contribution to this violence that we have, not only in this country, but even worse in Europe, as we've seen in the last year.
And to deny the deep historical context that absolutely exists to what's going on in the headlines. To deny that, Marc, makes it much easier for Americans to fit what's happening into a very simple cultural discourse, a very simple story where it's all black and white, and here's the evil person here, and here's the good person, and I'm the good person in this story. And of course, reality is always much more complicated.
Hence the title of my book, Misunderstanding Terrorism.
I like how you said that ISIS is all about making Islam great again. And clearly that kind of message resonated with Trump supporters who want to make America great again. The same kind of message is being used now that is drawing young people throughout the Islamic world to groups like ISIS. We're going to make your faith and your beliefs great again. And I want you to explore that, Marc.
We're going to make ourselves great again. It's not as much about beliefs as people think it is. It's really, we were the great power in the world in the 7th century. We ruled almost, half or a third of the populated world at that time. And, we've been in a great decline in the last 14 centuries. What happened? Especially in the last century and a half, when the Western powers really completely took over the world. So what happened? And, the message is a revivalist message, namely, we lost our way, and if we can follow the example given to us by the Salaf, which are the companions of the Prophet, which now have, gained a mythical reputation among young people who are excluded from the West, they're very attracted to this idea of let's make ourselves great again, just like the Salaf. That's why they call Salafi.
And they want to take the world back to before the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1917. They want to restore the Ottoman Empire. For lack of a better explanation of this, they want to, like Trump wants to take America back to some imagined scenario when things were better for a specific group of people.
That's exactly right. And of course, the reality of the past never lives up to one's imagined reconstruction of one's past. Islam was not that great, or the Islamic world was not that great after World War One, and especially after 1924, when the caliphate was abolished by the Turks. But in their mind, it's better than the present. So anything's better than the present. And that constitutes part of the attraction of the past, this nostalgia of a mythical past.
I find it fascinating, Mark, that some of the most powerful cultural narratives today, when it comes to power and what is truly attracting people, are these kind of return to the past narratives, whether it's Trump saying, I'm going to make America great again and take you back to some imaginary 1950s America, or ISIS, I'm going to make you great again, we're going to use our religion to do it, and we're going to go back to some imagined empire, Islamic empire, where all of those of the faith are united around the world. They're doing the same thing with Brexit. The same thing is happening in France. It's happening in Germany. It's happening in the Ukraine. It's happening around the world, where leaders are standing up and saying, I want to take you back to something that really doesn't exist.
That's correct, but it's not just now. I mean, the whole notion of the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's idea of the noble savage, if we can go back to simpler time where, we were in harmony with nature. This is a dream that's constant throughout history. It's not just now. There is something in us that really wants to recapture some greatness, some mythical greatness that we've had. But that's not why people kill. That's how people justify, what they kill. As I said, the killing, the violence comes out of a conflict. On one side are those guys who say, make the West or keep the West great again. The other guys say, make Islam great again. And, you have a conflict. And right now what you have is an escalation of this conflict. Both verbal, where you call the other guy barbarian, and each side calls the other guy the same thing. I mean, it's kind of a mirror image. And within that conflict, people get this illusion of a nonviolent way to address legitimate grievances. And then as one side attacks the other, it becomes a moral outrage of this egregious aggression of the out group against your own group that makes, a few people decide to volunteer as soldiers to protect your community and to defend your community. And that's why we have, on the one side, we call them terrorists, and they call us terrorists, and us, we are always virtuous. Our group is always virtuous, and we fight the other. And as the violence escalates, then, if you try to understand them, you are becoming a traitor to your own group because, people say, on whose side are you anyway? And so you can see that there are so many temptations to escalate the conflict and very few to tone it down. And unfortunately, I think the election of Donald Trump is another, retching up this type of verbal escalation against the other side. I don't see this being conducive to trying to tone down a little bit the conflict so that, maybe people will stop killing one another.
Marc Sageman is a forensic psychiatrist and a former officer with the CIA. His books include Understanding Terror Networks, Leaderless Jihad, and most recently, Misunderstanding Terrorism. Mark, you mentioned Donald Trump. As we're speaking right now, this is his first full day in office as the new president of the United States. You referenced the rhetoric and the story, the kind of narrative that he buys into about terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism, and what is it that concerns you most about what could happen? And help us understand, as citizens, what should we be paying attention to in the news that would really help us better appreciate and understand what's going to unfold over the next few weeks, months, and years?
It's really hard to tell because, as I say, it's a conflict. So two people kind of participate in that conflict. And by just kind of looking at one side, one thing I can tell you is that, the Islamic State is going to lose ground. That seems to be pretty much in the process right now. They're going to become smaller and smaller in the Middle East, but that doesn't mean that, 1.5 million people are going to accept the destruction, especially if, they are killed in a horrible, barbarous way. People will start saying, my God, they don't really deserve this, and, I need to get involved. So you may get more people who do not belong to ISIS, who sympathize with ISIS, and may decide to volunteer to become soldiers of ISIS, of this imagined community to them, and fight the West, Westerners fighting the West in the West on behalf of ISIS, which is what we've been seeing in the United States, and, somewhat a little bit in France, although in France, of course, what happened on 13 November 2015 was very much an ISIS-orchestrated attack against Paris. But otherwise, it's very much people who volunteer to become fighters, and that's why they're very difficult to detect because many have, no signs prior to their attacks, no signs of what people call radicalization. It's just an identification as a soldier to defend your community. So what I'm saying is that there certainly is a profile, but it's a subjective profile. It's a profile that you can identify if you drill into their mind, but objectively outside, it's really very hard to detect.
And this is a kind of thing, again, to return to history, Mark, the West has been dealing with this for decades, arguably hundreds of years, but really modern terrorism. We've been dealing with this kind of thing for many decades. 9/11 didn't happen in a vacuum. It didn't just all of a sudden happen.
Yeah, that's correct. But what you had is kind of this progressive escalation of the conflict. I'm in a kind of strange situation because, I've had one foot in the academy and one foot in the government, the intelligence community, fighting, those people that threaten us, as we call them terrorists. As I say, the label terrorism is one that's very deeply contested. And it's really an outsider's labeling of the fighters. So, they are terrorists for us, we are terrorists for them. The people on our side are freedom fighters. They fight on the side of virtue. They fight on the side of evil, the evildoers, as we call them. Despite the fact that the same person may be doing the same thing, like, for instance, Jalaluddin Haqqani of the Haqqani Network has been doing the same thing for the last 40 years. He's fought against invaders, against his own region, his own country. At the time, in the 1980s, he was fighting the Soviets, and we were supporting him, so he was a freedom fighter. But as we invaded Afghanistan in 2001, he kept fighting the foreign invaders, now us, and he became a terrorist, the head of the Haqqani network. So you can see that words have meanings, and they have meanings according to which side you're on. And as you point out, this has evolved over the last decade. But as I'm trying to tell you is that I've had a foot in each side, academia and the government. And so I'm in the position that everything that I've done for the government is secret. And right now I'm mostly an expert witness at terrorist trials. And again, I'm banned from commenting on what I do because I have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So I developed my ideas, interviewing the actual terrorists. I've interviewed 30 terrorists, not parents of terrorists, not people of their community, not friends, but actual shooters, the murderers. I've interviewed them in Afghanistan. I've interviewed them here in prison. I've interviewed them in Europe, in Saudi Arabia, even Guantanamo. But I cannot write about it. So I went back to history to see if there are, illustrations of what I see now. And certainly you have to go back to the French Revolution. So you talk about decades. I talk about centuries, 2.5 centuries to the French Revolution. And I've looked at those violent national movements, those, campaigns of political violence that spanned 4 continents, and it's all very similar mechanism that I described. Namely, people, there's an activation of a politicized social identity where people kind of feel that their group is repressed by either a government or a vigilante group. There's an escalation of the conflict. So this kind of leads to an extremity shift. There's a rhetorical escalation. There's disillusionment with legitimate grievance redress process, moral outrage at egregious out-group aggression, and then, of course, the activation of this martial social identity, namely becoming a soldier, defending your own community, and this leads to first individual violence and then to campaigns of political violence that are difficult to eradicate. Sometimes they, for the French case, lasted really from the French Revolution to World War I, over a century. So I'm pretty pessimistic, I must say.
Pessimistic that you can eradicate this kind of terrorism?
In the way that we think of it right now, yes. This terrorism focusing on the West really kind of started from the end of the Afghan Soviet war and kind of increased over the 1990s. And, at that time, Al-Qaeda kind of was the loudest voice, captured, this larger community of people really being very dissatisfied in the West. I mean, in especially Western Europe, you have a reservoir of young people who have no job, living in suburbs, not doing anything, living out of, petty crime. And, this idea comes in and said, look, the reason we're like that is because of imperialism, past imperialism, especially French policy and so on. So, what you guys are doing, this petty violence, it's kind of, in a sense, a result of that. But you can be greater. You can try to capture Islam again, capture the greatness of Islam again, and become a mujahid. And so those people are very attracted. They become radicalized in prison in France. And they join ISIS by over 1,000, about 1,400 people, French people, and another 600 Belgian, went to Syria and Iraq around 2013 and 2014 when it was expanding. It was really not a propaganda campaign by ISIS. It was really individuals who went there, and when they got there, they got apartments that were captured from the population that were scared and just left. So they had apartments, they were given Kalashnikov, they were giving, cars, women, and those guys sent selfies back on their Facebook and their Twitter accounts. And that really attracted many of the guys from Seine-Saint-Denis, which is a northern suburb of Paris, or Molenbeek, the Brussels neighborhood, and their friends started coming along and brought their girlfriends along. I mean, this, of course, reversed in 2015 when ISIS started running into difficulty. And in 2016, there is a reversal where a lot of people are coming back. They're calling the returnees, les revenants in French. And those are the people who did the November 13th Bataclan, massacre in France. So it's a very complicated story, but it's a much longer story than, people who either are born fanatic or become fanatic. I mean, it's so easy to vilify the adversary without trying to understand, so we can kill him. But that is not conducive to ending the conflict without understanding it.
Marc, is it fair to say that if we try as much as possible to get apples to apples, that there is a similar dynamic that continues to go on in the United States with the militia movement, with the white nationalists, white supremacists, where they cultivate young, marginalized young men, and they use whatever tools they have to turn them into soldiers. And is that fair to say that there's similar things go on with ISIS?
It's partially fair. I mean, the way you phrased it is wrong. I mean, unfortunately, these ideas are attractive to people. So it's not so much that you have those vigilantes who try to recruit young people, marginalized people, and so on. No. It's marginalized people who are attracted to those ideas. It's regardless whether those guys are trying to recruit them or not. They volunteer. It's worse than what you're describing. I mean, it would be nice to think that if you just eliminate the few recruiters, then we don't have the problem. No, it's actually worse than that, because young people or a lot of people are attracted to this kind of nostalgic past that really never existed in the United States. It didn't. In the 19th century, we had a lot of domestic problems, mostly with the industrialization of the United States and the expansion to the West, where we killed, a lot of Native Americans in the process. Then we still had blacks who were not slaves, but they were really second-class citizens. Not until the Civil Rights Movement that allowed a portion of the African-American population in the United States to reach the middle class and to have a lot of opportunities open to them. But even right now, in ghettos in the United States, we have a core of very poor people who just cannot get out of it because of the various more subtle discrimination, and that's pretty documented. We're talking about 2017 right now.
Yeah.
We have not eliminated ghettos. We still haven't, despite 50 years of trying.
Marc Sageman is a forensic psychiatrist and a former CIA officer. His most recent book is Misunderstanding Terrorism. Marc, what's your response to those in America, mostly conservatives, very conservative politically, who are convinced that this is all about Islam, that this is about religion, that this particular religion creates terrorists who want to kill Christians?
As you say, one has never accused Americans of being very sophisticated in terms of history and geography, and their concept is really a fairly unidimensional concept of what Islam is. There's 1.5 billion Muslims. it is as varied, if not more, as all the sects of Christianity, whether Protestant, Catholic, and so on. It's vast. It's huge. It is not within Islam itself. What you have is the extremism of the words, the metaphors that people use. We use the word crusade to actually get to them. Well, a crusade is not so much in the Bible. It is something that, Christian did, invaded the lands of Islam for 2 centuries, slaughtered quite a few population. Not all of them Muslims. A lot of Greek Orthodox suffered during, at the end of the 11th century when the Christians from France, Germany, and England invaded the Holy Land. So, you ask a Muslim right now, they will tell you there's something in Christianity that makes them violent. And, in a sense, you have to eradicate Christianity, which is what Al-Qaeda is saying. That's what ISIS is saying. And, it's the same mirror argument as what you hear. Conservative Americans don't know much about Islam, led by a self-proclaimed expert on Islam, to say, well, I know about Islam, it's within Islam, and we have to eradicate Islam. It's a clash of civilization. Well, it's not. It's within a conflict, the most extreme voices get louder. And that's what we have right now.
My guest is author and former CIA officer Marc Sageman. We'll take a quick break, and Marc will join us in the second half of this program. Welcome back. My guest is Marc Sageman. Marc is a former officer with the CIA, a forensic psychiatrist, and author. His most recent book is Misunderstanding Terrorism.
Marc, I've spoken with Trevor Aronson before, author and investigative journalist.
I know Trevor fairly well, yes. Yeah, very great guy.
and I've enjoyed interviewing him and having him on this program. And his book, which I strongly suggest to listeners, is The Terror Factory, where he has unearthed and dug up some very fascinating facts about how the FBI is grossly mishandling how they deal with combating terrorists on American soil. And it really is alarming to read his work, to talk to Trevor, and to, once you really wrap your mind around what he found and what he discovered, it is incredibly alarming. And what's your reaction to his work?
I agree. You see, Trevor is not retained in a court of law on the cases that he writes about. So he has the freedom to write about. I am retained, so I cannot talk about it. But my findings are identical to Trevor. I think that he's done a wonderful job, especially since he did not have access to all the discovery material that I had, and even sometimes interviewing the people who were convicted and, face life sentences right now. He's right. I mean, those people in sting operations, that's what he describes. I have no beef about it. But you have to understand why this comes about, and that's really what my book is about. People in the FBI self-categorize as the defenders of America, of Western society, And, they feel that they know a guy who's guilty when they see it, and they're going to set him up in a sting operation to be able to provoke some kind of crime so that they could arrest him. And what you see is that you have 18-year-old, often converts to Islam, who don't know much, not very bright, who are set up by the FBI, and the FBI says, press on this button, and this building will blow up. And, the guy looks up at the FBI, agent provocateur, because that's exactly who they are, who they look up to as, those soldiers that they should model against. So they basically follow the direction of the FBI, and they do what the FBI asks of them, just like Trevor describes. But in court, the entrapment defense is that if you find that the person had a previous predisposition to be violent, then it's okay. You can't really use the defense of entrapment. That defeats the defense of entrapment. And what I'm saying is that the violence is contextual, and there is no predisposition. It's really young people who try to model themselves on who they consider, prototype of soldiers that they don't know how to be a soldier. They don't know how to be a jihadist. And so they follow the lead of the FBI informant who shows them how to be a jihadist.
Right.
They get arrested. So that's exactly what Trevor describes.
Hey, Marc, what's your best explanation for what's happening in Syria? And I know you and I could talk for hours just about Syria alone and the proxy war between East and West. And how do you explain that to the average American citizen so that they can better appreciate what their own government, what the American government is doing and not doing in Syria? And what would you like to see from the Trump administration, perhaps, that we didn't see from the Obama administration?
Syria is a mosaic of population pieced together in the Paris conference of 1919. You have a lot of people who have, it's almost like the old Greek city-states of antiquity, 2,500 years ago. And they were put together. And, if they tolerate each other, if they have a tolerance, as the Turk policy was tolerance toward local population, you allow them to, do anything they want as long as they pay taxes to the Sultan. That's all. That's all what the Turks really cared about. So, after 1919, they tried to create nation states. And what you have in Syria is the Assad family, the Alawites. So they are Shia who captured a Sunni country. I would say the vast majority is Sunni. There are many various Christian sects of various, rites that date back to Christ himself. Those communities were very close. The Syrian communities were very close to the Aramaic people around Jesus Christ. And so you have this mosaic, and people are trying to transform into mosaic into a standardized population, and that's not possible right now. And so the Alawite, when they took over in the 70s, tried to eliminate Sunni resistance, mainly a Muslim Brotherhood that was not very violent, but became violent in Syria when Assad's uncle basically killed them. A huge massacre. 35,000 people were killed in a week in the city of Homs. And so that kind of set up this conflict between the Sunni who want to liberate it from the Assad family and the Assad family. So that's basically the background. And then you kind of start having international players. So Shias now Iran and Hezbollah are now supporting Assad. Russia, surprisingly, is supporting Assad. The Saudi Arabia and Sunni countries supporting the Sunnis. And we're trying to kind of create a fighting force. I wouldn't say a third party because, it's more like a 10th party. There are so many other parties there. And we tell them, look, you can only kill ISIS. You cannot kill the forces of Assad. And they say, but wait a minute, all the barrel bombs and so on, that's Assad killing us. Yeah. It's not ISIS killing us. And we tell them, no, against America, it would be against American law to kill the force of Assad. You can only kill ISIS. Of course, out of years of trying to build an independent army, we basically had 20 guys, I think, that we finally trained, and they all defected to people who actually were fighting against Assad, who they wanted to fight in the first place. So here, we are in a bizarre situation where, we want to be, clean according to American vision of just killing ISIS. And we're in a world where ISIS is not as relevant as the big enemies there, namely the Assad regime that killed over 200,000 people, over 200,000 people in the barrel bombs and used gas against its own population. So, I'm not really sure that we can monitor that fight. And as long as this does not spill over to the West, and the reason it spilled over to the West is that the West was involved in the fighting, as I mentioned. If you bomb my people, I'm going to bomb your guys at home, because you bomb my people at home. But if the West was not involved, I don't think we would have terrorism here in the West.
You don't?
No, I don't think so. It really kind of started with the ISIS stuff, started after 2004, after the summer of 2014. Before, there was no plan. I mean, you can check it. There was no plan. All the people who were arrested who wanted to join, ISIS or Al-Qaeda, the Nusra faction, Nusra al-Jabhat. In Syria, it was after 2014 here in the state. Nobody had heard of them.
I encourage people always to look up Operation Cyclone, do your research, do your own homework. I mean, Brzezinski, the whole plan in the Carter White House to arm the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and to specifically whip up Islamic fundamentalist terror networks in Afghanistan as tools, as proxy tools to fight the Russians.
I was involved for 3 years in that fight. Again, I cannot write about it because I was involved in that fight. And that's not really what happened. Definitely not what happened. This is a revision of history of what happened in the 1980s. And, unfortunately, that war, the Soviet-Afghan war, is one of the critical wars of the 20th century. But yet there still is no decent history of really what happened. And it's kind of bizarre, but nobody really wants to do anything. The CIA is not releasing the documents, and it was a CIA-run operation. The Army was not involved. State Department was not involved. So, you really don't have any kind of real historian, writing about what really happened in the 1980s. Now, Al-Qaeda is more of a product of the 1990s. Of the influence of the Egyptian, mostly Al-Jihad, but also Al-Gama Islamiyah as well, that came into this informal group called Al-Qaeda. And it kind of evolved in the 90s, mostly in the Sudan, in Khartoum. And by the time they got back to Afghanistan in 1996, there was that very long, strange Bin Laden declaration of war against the West. So 1996 is really kind of where you can point it to, but not really before.
But I think you and I are in agreement, and that's in fact what I was saying earlier. Was Operation Cyclone and the CIA were the ones who led the effort in Afghanistan to arm the Mujahideen.
Afghans.
Yeah.
Not the foreigners, the Afghans.
The Afghans, and who were not the Mujahideen?
The Afghans are called Mujahideen. The foreigners came there really to help, humanitarian way, and it was only, a year and a half prior to the withdrawal of the Soviets. In April, May of 1987, that you see the first skirmish with foreign fighters at Al-Masada near Jaji Ali Hell, near Host. And you're talking about 20 people defending their camp, which was called Al-Masada, the Lion's Den, that the Soviets tried to destroy because that was their last attempt to prevent the incoming of all the weapons inside Afghanistan in the summer of 1987. It turns out that Gorbachev gave them an ultimatum. If the situation does not improve, we'll withdraw. And so they started trying to destroy all the logistics route to inside Afghanistan. They fought this little skirmish. I wouldn't call it a battle. In Al-Masada, the people who survived Al-Masada became Al-Qaeda later on. But as I said, you need to understand what happened in Afghanistan.
Mark, at the heart of your latest book, Misunderstanding Terrorism, is this plea for the West to truly appreciate the extent to which it has been engaged in both its military and its government in provocation of these forces that they're now saying, well, they must hate our freedom and they just don't like us, and all of these ridiculous explanations that we hear in the press and from politicians. You're making this plea. Now, let's assume that happens. Take for a moment, let's just assume that we get it, that we understand that, yes, indeed, American forces and American policy has greatly, profoundly contributed to and engaged in provocation of what we now call terrorism. Not necessarily creating it, but provocating. We've hit that beehive over and over again, and now we're shocked that we're getting stung. Oh, really? So what happens next? Assuming America gets that message that you have in your book, then what happens? Is Donald Trump right, this America first, that we just need to pull back to our borders and pull up the drawbridge?
No, not quite. But you have to understand the foreign threat, and you have to contain it abroad. But I said contain it. If you start bombing them, they're going to bomb us here. Not they. I would say people who sympathize with them here will then, volunteer, like what happened in Orlando and San Bernardino. They weren't connected to ISIS, but they decided that, enough is enough. They were outraged, and they expressed their outrage by going out and killing almost 100 Americans. So containment abroad and, fair repression at home. You cannot conflate various conflicts abroad as, there are no division. There's no ISIS in this country. And so you have to have an enlightened state strategy to break the cycle of violence through justice and fairness. So focus on proportional repression of lawbreakers at home. You isolate and remove the violent people from the larger community that sympathize. Fair police conduct, you decrease police brutality and nursing operation. Try to bring them back to the fold. Say, look, we accept you. You're American just like us, and not saying, we don't want you. We want to go back to where you came from. It's kind of the opposite of what we're saying. You have to undermine the meaning of this identification by, showing that a lot of the people that they model themselves on are really corrupt, and you disillusion them. You try to resist gratuitous self-promotion by the FBI, by politicians. Try to return to justice and fairness through impartial and transparent procedural justice with reasonable punishment. And, you have to be vigilant against biased prosecutors, biased law enforcement personnel like Trevor Aronson described, and even judges. Judges are American. They identify themselves against ISIS, and therefore, the trials are not really all that fair. They suppress all the defense motion, they agree to all the prosecutor motion, and, I think terrorism enhancement in sentencing is, again, being unfair to, this population that just tries to defend their brothers abroad. So if all those measures are implemented, terrorism or, violence in the Middle East will continue forever because it's independent to what is happening in this country and it's kind of independent to what is happening in Western Europe. But if Western Europe goes back to this justice and fairness, people and young people who do not feel included will feel more included in the society, and they're not going to kind of start fighting their own society because they'll feel part of it. As opposed to now, they feel completely excluded. They feel, that they're not American, they're not European. They're part of the Ummah. Those non-denominational Muslims. And so that's what you need to do. There is not a simple solution. It's really a whole set of policies that kind of show them that they're partly included into this greater nation that's either the United States or now all the European communities. Now, Europe is a little bit worse than we are because there is no European social identity and they're all breaking up. As you could see, Brexit is a huge wave of nationalism in Europe as there is in this country. And so it's a little bit more difficult to have this all-inclusive vision, that would inspire young people who are right now rightly see that they are excluded from society to take their revenge on society. Well, you have to include them, and that's really the best solution to decrease what happened. I mean, the same thing happened in the 60s and 70s in this country, where we started saying that. African Americans are really Americans. They're entitled to the voting right. We can't discriminate against them. The students who protest against Vietnam, I think it's their right to protest against Vietnam. We stopped demonizing them, and I think the issue kind of resolved itself. Not so much because we killed all the students. It's because they went on to other things, get married, have a job, making a living, and so on.
Marc Sageman is a former CIA officer, a forensic psychiatrist and author. His books include the best-selling Understanding Terror Networks, Leaderless Jihad, and most recently the must-read Misunderstanding Terrorism. Marc, you have been very generous with your time, and I can't thank you enough, and I look forward to having you back on the program again. Thank you very much for the work you do.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to explain myself. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to the Citizens Band Radio Hour, a production of the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. Archived podcasts are available online at mediaandcitizenship.org. The executive producers for the program are Siva Vaidyanathan and Coy Barefoot.